That's the way to do it. Good. Everybody prospect last week?
Yes.
That's a good sign if you did. We're gonna keep on that tomorrow. I'm really excited, actually. I mean, as disappointed as I am that John Side's not able to make it, I'm pretty darn excited that Brian Burnett is going to be coming up.
That's
So
cool.
that'll be a lot of fun. I think I mentioned John's having heart issues and similar I had, but just different part of the heart, but has to have an ablation. Just has his heart racing, so doing crazy stuff on it. Okay, so just in regards to prospecting, we were talking, I mean, basically, I haven't stood up here yet in now 2 weeks and not talk about the importance of prospecting, Kelly. Did you know it's important?
I know it's.
I just check it. All right. I don't know if you didn't. I don't know. You look confused for a minute, Kelly. It's early. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right. So years ago, I was asked, I mean, Jay, way even before I knew you, I was asked to give a talk or a message in relationship to prospecting. And this would have been back in 1999, actually, maybe 2000. It was somewhere in there. Anybody, maybe some of you weren't even born by then, by the way. There might be a few of you, just one of you. You might have been born, Jocelyn, right? When were you born? 2000. That's right. That's what I thought. You say you're 22. Okay. All right. With that being said, so I remember I put this class together, and this class is something that became the anchor of everything I did when I talked about prospecting. I mean, Jay, you've certainly heard some of these things before. Some of you probably have heard them in some of the things we've done with like Elevate and Climb that we did earlier this year. But I just want to remind you, right? We've talked about the numbers of prospecting. We've talked about the importance of prospecting. We've talked about the need for prospecting. And we can talk about the sources of prospecting. We'll probably get into that. But one of the things I recognize that no matter whether you're door knocking or whether you're making a phone call, whether you're calling your sphere, whether you're calling anybody, it all applies. It's all the same principles. And weirdly, the list that I have when I talk about prospecting isn't much different than the same list that I had way back in the day, near over 20 years ago. So with that, I just want to focus on a few things in regards to just prospecting. So when I'm prospecting, one of the things I've recognized is number one is this. And I remember this was the first thing I wrote down. It's still the first thing that I'll write down today in regards to a activity or a principle of prospecting. And that is focus. And one of the things I've recognized over the years is that so often we lose our focus when we're prospecting. And what I mean by that is we forget why we're doing it. That's one of the things we forget. And then we forget what we're supposed to be doing when we are prospecting. You say, well, how's that even possible? Sometimes we get so engaged in the amount of calls that we have to make, or what they're saying, or that you don't want to be doing it, or it seems really scary, or you're overcoming something really challenging, and we lose focus of what we're supposed to be doing. But I just want to remind you that the number one reason that you prospect, the focus is that you're there to set an appointment or appointments. All right. And might may seem like, well, duh, George, of course that's why I'm prospecting. But I'm telling you, people forget that. They forget that when they're on the phone, they focus on, well, I'm going to mirror and match this person, or I'm going to bring lots of value, or I'm going to connect at a really high level. And I remember years ago, probably the same time frame, to over 20 years ago, I remember someone coming to me and saying, hey, I'm going on my first appointment. What should I do? And just as a side note, I said, well, you got to do these three things. You've got to connect to someone, you've got to create value, and you've got to close. Well, I was talking to a loan officer just a few days ago, last week, and I said, look, you're really great at connecting. You're really good at closing, but are you really asking for the business? And what I find in prospecting a lot, or in presentations, is that a lot of people will connect at a really high level, like, oh, they're such good people. We had such a great connection. And then you bring value. You might bring value in regards to your leadership. You might bring value in regards to who you are. You bring value in the things that you do, the things that you offer, the strategies, the tools. But then somehow we forget this one element, and that is the close. And I find it happening in both prospecting and presenting, both buyers and to sellers. We say, well, not me. Really? For sure? Because what should happen, I think we'll have time to get there, but we should have 5+ closes every time that we're prospecting on every single call. Now, will people hang up on you? Of course they will. Will you get through every single call like that? No, but that should be the focus. And all the data shows that 90+% of all yeses that happen in sales happen after the 5th time that you ask someone to sign a contract or to meet or to take the next step, 5 or more times. So it's not enough that you just ask once and they say no. When you walk in, I mean, the easiest thing is you walk into the local Nordstrom's or Dillard's, and the first thing out of the salesperson's mouth is what?
Help you.
Yeah, maybe. All right. I was going to say, hopefully they'll say hello, but right. But hi, hello, may I help you? And then your answer is what? Always just looking. And then they leave you there. The thing is, that's interesting is I always think you could change the entire retail space if you just ask this simple question, which is, hey, share with me, what is it you're looking for? And the thing is that so often you walk out with them something, even when you already know you're there to buy something. So get really serious in recognizing that it's not just to connect, it's not just to create value. It's you've got to also close. You got to do all 3 of them. And somehow we forget this when we prospect. And of course, even when we present, because yes, we could be rejected. Yes, they could say no. Yes, they might say, we need to think about it. Hey, call us in a couple of weeks. There's all these things that can happen. But I am telling you, if you don't do all 3 of these things in the presentation and the prospecting process, you're always going to struggle with prospecting. So just go back to this. You have to have a focus. There has to be a key focus in regards to what your outcome is. The second thing I've always written down has been this, and that is energy. Now, you may say, well, do you mean like jumping up and down and screaming and like we're doing affirmations? No, that's not what I mean. Because what I have found is that the people who are almost dead to the world have maybe just barely enough light, like a flickering lamppost of excitement. Those people take a lot of my energy. And people who are also highly energetic take energy. So it's not just one type of person that you're working with, because it takes a lot of energy. That's why I talk about rest, nutrition, diet, exercise, all these things, because it requires of you to create a tremendous amount of energy. So all of a sudden, when you're focused on your outcome, you have to have a tremendous amount of energy. Well, we haven't even really gotten to the skill sets. And so you start looking at this and going, wait a second here. Can I do those 2 things? Well, I know you can, because then you start moving into, okay, wait a second here. Now, what are the specific skills? If I have the energy and the focus, now what? Well, then it comes down to, okay, well, my next step is that I need to make sure that I have the skills, and the skills that I'm looking for. I'm just going to list a ton of these under here, but let's just focus on this first one. And the first one is the number 1 building block to all rapport. And the number 1 way in which we build connection and rapport with another human being is how? Communication, yes, but let's get real specific. How do we communicate? What is it that we're doing?
Answer questions.
Yeah, Quinn, it's ask questions. I mean, the number 1 building block is asking questions. That's it. I mean, that's the number 1 thing. And sometimes we forget about that. We forget, oh, wait, the more I know, then the more I'll say. Well, that's not reality to how a great presentation or how a great prospecting call goes. It's the power of our questions. And we could get into this where we talk about yes or no questions. We could talk about the questions in the sense that are open-ended. And we could talk about the emotional questions, which is what I'm most concerned about. So I like to divide into those 3 areas. We'll get later this week, we'll get into the depth of that. But I just want to point out that the number 1 building block to all breaking down of resistance, number 1 building block of getting them to communicate back with you, Kelly, is your power to asking questions. So the stronger you are at asking questions, the better you are going to have at just a simple close. All right, now let's go to the next thing. The next thing is we want to act like we're actually listening. Hopefully we really are, but we want to repeat and we want to affirm. You may say, well, that seems like a pretty easy thing. And somebody may even say, well, what does that mean? It means when someone says something like, hey, we're moving to Phoenix, you say you're moving to, you repeat what they said, you're moving to Phoenix, and then you're going to affirm, you're going to give them words of encouragement, 9 out of 10 times. Now you don't say that, Trevor, when they have their mother who is recently maybe just passed away. You go, your mother just passed away. That's great. Right? That's probably not the right answer, right? But my point is that could we get into the we'll get another day into the depth of what you would do there. But I just want to point out that repeating and affirming is really what we call. Let me just write it. You might want to write this down, which is called active listening. Guys, all the role playing that you're doing, all the practice that you're making, if you're not conclusively and assertively and aggressively, actively listening, so asking questions and actively listening, if that's all you got today, it would change the whole course of most people's prospecting. I'm going to ask a ton of questions and I'm going to listen. That's the core of our business. But somehow we think, well, the more, here's the scary part, the more that you know, especially if you're an experienced agent, the more that you know, the more you talk and the less you listen, because you already know the answers. And the problem is that when we are new, we don't ask enough questions because we don't want people to think, well, what if I don't know? What if I don't act like I know what I'm doing? But the power of your questions is what will lead every call. It leads every single presentation. That's why my opening presentation call is, or message, or a question is, help me and ultimately tell me what are you wanting to accomplish? Even if I've asked them on the phone, I'll say, hey, Jake, I know I talked to you on the phone, but I just want to hear again from you. What is it you're ultimately trying to accomplish? Because I want them to tell me. I want them to, and I'll ask questions like, tell me, what do you expect from me? What would you expect from an agent? All of a sudden, they give you the answers to the test. They give you all the answers. It's an open book test when you ask the right questions. What would you like me to do marketing? Oh, do this and do that and do that. Okay, well, we do all those things. Great. Is there anything else? Well, no, that sounds good. Great. All of a sudden, you start to realize that the entire presentation is created from, whether it's prospecting or a listing presentation or buyer presentation, is based on the amount of questions that you ask. The power of your questions. Doesn't mean don't ever talk. It just means that if you forget to ask questions, you're always going to have barriers. You're always going to have resistance. You're always going to have these walls that'll be up because you weren't asking and repeating and affirming. Make sense? Any questions asked so far? So important. Like beyond, like, and the worst, forgive me, I'm not trying to pick on my experienced agents here, but the worst is experienced agents of this because they already know everything. That doesn't mean that you don't know tons of stuff, but I'm telling you, man, if you can get back to these fundamentals of asking and repeating, affirming, you will break down tons of walls, lots of resistance, and you'll move through the presentation or the call in such a better manner. Okay, let's go to the next thing. These are, as I move through these aren't necessarily in any particular order. And as we move through the weeks to come, we're going to start breaking down some of these things. But let's just talk about one of the ones I love on the phone, right? Is we're going to match rate of speech. We're going to match their speech. Now under here, I'm just going to mark this, that match their rate of speech, but also we would match the tone, the volume, and the pitch of their voice. So the strength of their voice, the tone, are they monotone? Or it's the pitch, it's a high and low. You say, why am I doing all this? Seems so manipulative. I used to not realize when I'd be talking about it, like, so dishonest. You can't believe, what are you trying to do? Trick people? No, I'm not trying to trick anybody. I'm trying to connect with them And people like to be with people that are like them. So if the skill is that I'm trying to connect so that I can then help them feel comfortable, I write this up there or on your notes, then that equals to where they allow you to lead them. So if they're connected to you, it's because they felt comfortable or they begin to feel comfortable as the next step. And then they go on to allow you to lead them, to sign contracts, to make appointments, to get price reductions, to put a buyer, to put an offer on the home. All of a sudden, when they're connected with you, this is the reason we're using these skills, so we can connect. They say, but that still seems so manipulative. Well, no, only if this, and I've talked about this before, but the only difference between manipulation, which no one likes to feel manipulated, versus, let's put it over here. So we'll do this, persuasion versus manipulation is the intentions that you have. What are your intentions? Because here's the scary part. The scary part is that every single skill set that you use to manipulate someone is the exact same skill sets that you use to persuade someone. You're like, whoa, then hold on. How do I know the difference? The only difference, I mean, look, the person who's trying to manipulate you smiles. The person who's trying to persuade you smiles. The person who's trying to manipulate you matches your rates of speech. Well, then how am I supposed to know? You're supposed to know because what are the intentions that you have? Is your intention to help them? Is your intention to do good by them? Is your intention to help them buy or sell a piece of property and to help them get the best price, the most? I mean, just ask yourself, what are your intentions? So why do all these skills matter? And the difference between am I manipulating someone versus persuading someone, it all comes down to whether or not you're looking and just taking a step back going, okay, what are my intentions here? What am I really trying to do here? Why do I do what I do? Why do I help the way I help? Why am I speaking the way I speak? Just at least know and just make sure that your intentions are correct. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be of the intention that I want to earn money, but maybe it was if I help enough people get what they want, I'll get what I want, which is the money. But get really serious about what your intentions are, at least be aware of what your intentions are. Because then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I'll use all these skills. No problem. I'm not manipulating anybody. I'm just trying to help people. And my job is to be, write this down. My job is to be what they need me to be. This isn't about you. This is about a potential client or a client. My job is to be what they need me to be. And if they need you to be gentle and soft in your tone, or a little less volume and maybe a little slower rate, or maybe a little faster, if they need that from you, that's because your job is to be what they need you to be. And if you remember that, then all of a sudden you start to recognize that my intentions are to be what this person needs me to be. It would be no different than an attorney needs to be for you what they need you to be. A doctor needs to be what they need to be for you. You may say, and then some doctors will not change anything. Some attorneys don't change anything. Some CPAs don't change anything. And in fairness, they may be really, really good at what they do, but you're completely disconnected to them. But the only way in which you allow them to lead you is if you feel comfortable. So you have to, in this business of real estate, recognize that connection is everything. It's not you're just trying to be everybody's friend. You're trying to connect so that they'll listen to what you have that's valuable and they'll allow you to lead them and close them. That's what you're trying to get to. But if we don't just do the basic fundamentals of asking questions, repeating, affirming, matching rates of speech and tones and volumes of pitch, then all of a sudden we will never get to that level of connection. It doesn't matter whether I'm Isabel in title or I'm a loan officer. It doesn't matter. What matters is that as you move through this, it's life. That's how we operate. It's how, and I've made the joke for, geez, probably 20 years, but the joke has always been that, with Jennifer, right? I've been married now coming up on 30 years here this coming March. And, I joke about the fact if I did this with Jennifer and she says, I'm going to the store, and I say, well, hey, you're going to the store. That's great, right? Repeat and affirm. Tell me, what is it that you're going to get? And she says, milk, and eggs. Milk and eggs, that's great. What else are you gonna get? She'd be thinking something's wrong, like because I'm listening, right? I mean, that's what happens. I'm repeating and affirming, I'm connecting, like, what do you want? Why are you doing this? Right? Because all of a sudden we're repeating and affirming. But if someone came to you, hey, I got a new car, you would go, oh, okay. You would go, you got a new car. That's great. What type of car did you get? And they say, I got a new BMW. Good for you. Tell me about it. Tell me more about your car. What color is it? Because you totally engage. That's how real life is engaging. And all of a sudden we get onto a phone call, we get onto a door knocking, we forget to ask questions, we forget to repeat and affirm. I've written down here, but we should be smiling, we should be engaging. I mean, there's all these different tools that this is just a few of them. But if you just did ask and repeat affirm and match some rates of speech, boy, it would change everything in a heartbeat. Right? And we could get into we will, but if we were to get into person, we're going to match body language. We're going to do all sorts of things where we connect so that we can get what we want, which is we want to help these people. You never see that up there. What is the time? Is it 8:00? It's always so glared. It's 8:00 what? 8:05. Okay. So let's just go for 5 more minutes. So just a couple more things. Asking questions, repeat affirm, match rate speech, match tone. This is as if we're on the phone. If we were in person, then again, we talk about matching body language. But I'm not going to do that today. We're going to get back to that on another day. But let's just go back to a couple of other skill sets. So if I am prospecting, I want to make sure I'm doing a couple of things. And let's just put up here level shift. Let's put up here pattern interrupt. We will no way get through all these, but I just want to have them so you have them on your list. Pattern interrupt. And I probably should have put it way up here on the list because I believe it's such a high one. But let me put this last one up here, which is empathy. Okay, so let's talk about those three just really quick. I'm going to start with empathy first. Write this down on empathy. I'm going to write up here just this simple statement. If I were you, I'd feel, think, believe, do the same thing too. So what's the big deal about that? It's a big deal because once you give someone no power to argue with you about anything, all of a sudden the resistance goes. If I was to pick skills, this is probably number 2, just right after these two right here. Number 1 and 2, almost the same, but I'm going to ask questions, repeat and affirm. Boy, this is right up there. We're not going to meet with agents. You're not meeting with agents. Totally get it. That's great. In fact, if I were you, I'd do the same thing too. You say, well, wait a second here. But I want to list their home. We're looking for a home on our own. You're looking for a home on your own? That's great. If I were you, I'd probably do the same thing too. You're like, well, hold on a second here. Now, I didn't say you didn't say, Quinn, if it were me, this is what I do. We're saying if it were you, well, then it sounds like that's what you're going to do. And if I were you, then that's what I do. Because that's what you're doing. You're looking for a home on your own. You're selling on your own. You're going to do everything on your own. The point is that this reduces resistance. Like and there's no book I read. I was just a simple. You realize that if I said, Brenda Lee, you know what? If I were you, I'd feel the same way too. I don't blame you one bit. I mean, who would want to work with an agent? I work with them all day. I get it. So, hey, let me ask you. And then I just would start off with, let me ask you. And then I just get right back on the script and I'd be right there where I need to be. Now, maybe you say, man, this all seems so simple. And that's the thing. It does. When you're in a conversation, it all seems so simple because it is pretty easy. But the fact is that as you move through this, you start to realize, wait a second here, this is really an art. This is really a skill set or skill sets that I can develop. And that's why I go back to that. There's nothing you can't learn. There's nothing you can't do in this business. And tomorrow, when you see Brian Burnett, he's on track for $4 million this year. And he's going to spend 20 minutes talking about prospecting. That's what he's going to do. And then 10 minutes of questions. And you'll be like, oh, what did you do, Brian? And you'll be like, well, I called people. Well, but what did you say? Well, I repeated and affirmed. I matched some rates of speech with tone and my pitch and the volume of my voice. And well, I showed a little empathy. I said things like, I don't blame you one bit if I were you do the same thing too. You may say, well, what else? When they try to divert you and tell you how bad real estate agents are, or I'm not willing to pay a commission, what did you do? Well, then I did things like level shifted, and I said things like, when they said, how much is your commission, Kelly? And I said, well, that's a great question. What I really hear you saying is you just want to net the most money on your home, right? Well, yeah. So if my commission was fair and I could net you the most amount of money, it seems like we should meet, right? Well, I don't know. Well, you know what? We're only working for possibilities. Why don't we plan on today at 4 o'clock? Does that work for you? Whatever, right? But I'm going to use level shifts are getting people to focus in simple terms. You want to write this down? Get people to focus on the right stuff. It doesn't matter what your commissions are. What matters is what people walk away with. It doesn't matter whether or not you're paying for closing costs for a seller or for a buyer on a listing. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Get them to focus on the right stuff. We can get into great depth. We don't have time. And pattern interrupts are just interrupting a pattern. When someone is, you see this, little babies are all the time. They start crying, and what happens? The little baby starts crying, and what happens? What does a parent do? They get their attention and started to focus on something else, right? They'll be like, oh, look. And they'll be like, oh, wait, I'm crying here. What do you mean? What are we looking at over there? Because we're going to break the pattern. So it's no different in business. We're going to break when they start on a pattern of, well, no, I won't meet with you. No, I don't want to hear from you. No. I'm going to change the pattern. Hey, tell me, do you have a 2-car garage or 3-car garage? What color are your socks? We're just going to break the pattern. And we say, well, that's ridiculous. Is it? Because they're in a pattern of saying no, a pattern of defiance, a pattern of not going down the right path. So how are you breaking patterns? And we say, man, how? What, you tell me I got to learn all this stuff? Yeah, because you're in the business of communicating. You might want to say you're in the business of real estate. It has nothing to do with real estate. It has to do with your ability to communicate at the highest level. And the higher you can communicate, the more money you'll make. Your money is in direct correspondence to 2 things: your ability to communicate and the level of discipline you will put out. That's it. It's no more than that. So when you say, oh man, I'm not making money, just check your discipline and check your skill sets. That's it. It doesn't come down to anything else. You say your mindset, yeah, sure. But in the end, if your discipline's there and your skills are there, you will make money. And if you're not making money, then it is a skill set issue or it is a discipline issue. It is what you do with your time, and it is what you do when you do with your time. I mean, how good are you when you do it? Make sense?
Yes.
We're just getting started. Awesome. Just getting started. But I would just challenge you, man, master your craft. Master what you do. Master the ability to communicate. Master the ability to set an appointment every single day. And then once you do that, get to the second one. You're going to see again tomorrow with Brian, you're going to see extraordinary skill sets. You're going to see someone who's figured it out. And what they figured out is high discipline, high skill sets, and protect your mind at all costs, like we talked about last Friday. Okay. All right, you guys, let's rock and roll.